Welcome to History Twists. In this episode, we will start with real, documented history. Then we'll choose a plausible divergence point and follow it forward. Our subject is James A. Garfield, born poor, intellectually formidable, president for only a few months, and then bam, shot.
He's often remembered as a what-if presidency. But the what if isn't just melodrama. Garfield stepped into a live wire. Patronage, party factions, civil rights, post-Civil War reconciliation, and big fights over money and the role of the federal state.
And we're not just doing him as a footnote here, folks. I'm going to treat this like a real case study. Who he was, what he believed, and what he touched in those first months, and what could realistically have changed if he had lived. Plus the twist elements of merit-based reform influenced by China's exam system, pension expansion that includes Confederate veterans, a Dominican Republic statehood bargain with Blaine, and a paper money restart that calms parts of the Republican coalition.
In order to understand the changes we want Garfield to make in this version, we have to understand who he really was. Garfield's origin story matters because it shaped his self-concept. He was born to a poor family on an Ohio frontier farm, associated with a log cabin upbringing, the last president born in a log cabin, and real material scarcity. His father died when he was very young, only 2 years old, and his mother carried the family through hardship.
That's exactly right, Dr. Deneen. And he wasn't poor in an abstract kind of a way. He actually worked multiple jobs to get educated. He was doing teaching, manual labor, and he rose through academia in public life. Now, that's not just inspiring, it's why he's so allergic to spoils politics later. If you claw your way up through competence, then you tend to resent the system where jobs are party prizes.
Yes, sir. Psychologically, that can produce two different kind of linked traits. First, a strong internal locus of control, and that is the belief that disciplined effort changes outcomes. Second, a moralized view of competence. Not only skills matter, but skills should matter because anything else feels like a rigged world. That helps explain why civil service reform wasn't a side issue for him. It was personal, almost identity level personal.
Now, how did he get the nomination? Garfield didn't arrive at the 1880 Republican Convention as a nominee, a candidate at all, much less a frontrunner. The party was split. Former President Ulysses Grant, James G. Blaine, John Sherman. The factions were deadlocked.
Yes, they were. And here are the mechanics, because for this twist, they do matter. The convention went through multiple ballots without even having a winner. See, Garfield attended intending to support John Sherman, but the stalemate dragged on until delegates finally started having to look for a compromise. He ends up nominated on the 36th ballot, a classic compromise candidate outcome.
And that was the second most ballots ever cast for this kind of thing. It's really weird. That kind of nomination produces a specific leadership problem because you inherit a coalition that you did not build. You owe favors to factions you're simultaneously trying to discipline.
Dr. Weaver, that is exactly right. I couldn't agree more. And that's why the twist here can't just be, oh, Garfield lives and does everything he wants to do. He would still be managing the party ecosystem that put him there because no one else could win.
You're quite right, Chandler. Garfield then faces Democrat Winfield Scott Hancock, a popular Civil War Union general. The election is razor thin in the popular vote, but Garfield wins the Electoral College decisively.
Here are some numbers for you to think about. Garfield wins by under 10,000 votes nationally, depending on the source. Basically, a statistical hair, but electorally, the map converts that into a governing mandate. What helps him? Well, there are two things that show up in contemporary descriptions: his personal story and his emphasis on monetary questions in a financially anxious period.
From a behavioral standpoint, close elections tend to increase paranoia and factional aggression after the win. Everybody believes the real mandate belongs to them because the margin is too small to settle the argument emotionally.
Garfield's public philosophy is stitched from several threads: union preservation, education as civic infrastructure, and a belief in honest administration. His inaugural address emphasizes the weight of national continuity and responsibility.
And economically, he is associated with hard money thinking, favoring stability and credibility in currency. Now that matters because later we're going to introduce the twist of paper money restarted, which is not his natural instinct. Historically, Garfield argued against rolling back the post 1879 resumption framework. He wanted paper at parity with gold, not an indefinite inflationary drift.
So his philosophy is competence over connection, institutions over vibes, credibility over improvisation. That's a psychological profile that predicts a president who tries to formalize rules, especially around firing and hiring and administration.
In the real world, Garfield is shot in July 1881 and dies in September of that year. His presidency becomes synonymous with abrupt loss.
And the assassination isn't just a tragedy, it's a policy accelerant. The public now sees the ugliest edge of the spoil system because the assassin believed he actually deserved a job. That shockwave is part of why civil service reform becomes politically unstoppable soon after this.
Which sets up our twist perfectly. If Garfield lives, reform happens earlier and stronger, or maybe the urgency fades. Let's take a look at the twist divergent point that we've selected. The point we selected is July the 2nd, 1881. The shooting still occurs, but medical care and infection control go better. Garfield survives with chronic pain and a long rehabilitation process, which is successful.
The key constraint is he returns politically weakened in the short term, but with major moral authority, because survival turns him into a living symbol of what patronage politics can cost.
And that gives him leverage to do something that presidents rarely do well. And that's rewrite the hiring rules of government in a way that will outlive him. Now, I want to get into the exam state now. Let's build the core twist here. Garfield doesn't just pass a Pendleton style reform, he codifies merit as the default logic of federal hiring, and he does it by borrowing legitimacy from an older model, the Chinese imperial examination tradition, filtered through British reform, then adapted from the U.S. This isn't random. Reformers in the 1800s explicitly discussed Chinese and British systems as models for competitive selection.
Historically, China's long-running examination system, it goes back to the third century, influenced Western thinking about bureaucracy and the use of testing. Britain had used competitive exams for the civil service for 40 years by that time, and that success influenced American reformers and the eventual 1883 Civil Service Act.
Psychologically, this does two things. One, it reduces the daily anxiety of political survival inside agencies. Fewer jobs depend on pleasing a party boss, in other words. Two, it changes the personality type attracted to government work over time. It's less political operator, more credentialed administrator.
Now, in our twist timeline, Garfield actually sells it like this: not, we're importing China, but history shows that exams can stabilize institutions across centuries. We'll use a Republican version: transparent, auditable, and limited by law.
Now, the reality is, however unjust it may be, to get this through, the president will have to make some political deals. And the one thing that Democrats want is an increase in pensions. Now, in the real history, union pensions expand dramatically after the Civil War, with major growth spurts tied to laws like the Arrears Act of 1879, which authorized a lot of back payments, and later expansions.
And also, in real history, the federal government did not grant pensions to Confederate veterans. Former Confederates generally relied on Southern state pension systems. So our twist is big. Garfield brokers a national reconciliation pension framework that includes Confederate veterans, but only by trading for Democratic votes needed to ram through civil service reform.
Indeed. And there was fears, and some of those fears actually probably came true, that there would be people who would try and spoof the system. In other words, getting benefits that they didn't deserve because of record keeping, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure some of that happened, but that would have still made a remarkable difference. The bargain would be psychologically combustible. For union veteran groups, it can feel like the moral equivalence. For Southern Democrats, it can be framed as restoring dignity. For Garfield, it's a cold institutional calculation. I will spend money to buy votes for a rules based state.
And in our twist timeline, Democrats accept a larger pension outlays, including Confederate vets, because it pumps money into their states and softens sectional resentment. And Republicans accept it because Garfield ties it to the merit system and a reduced spoils machine. The cost is moral outrage, and the gain is institutional transformation.
Now, Secretary of State James G. Blaine, folks, he's the big power in the Republican Party at that time. And in order to back this civil service reform, he has to get something out of this too. The reason he matters is because foreign policy and party management continually overlap. Historically, Blaine's planned Pan American Conference, designed to promote greater unity with Central and South America, was canceled after Garfield's death.
And here's yet another twist bargain. Garfield trades support for Dominican Republic statehood in exchange for Blaine fully backing the Garfield civil service package, using Blaine's influence to keep key Republicans in line.
See our Things You Don't Know, Robert Small's podcast to learn more about that. But we need a historical footing. The United States had already flirted with annexing the Dominican Republic as far back as the Grant administration, and the idea included a promise of eventual statehood in the earlier treaty effort that in our timeline was rejected by the Senate. So Garfield isn't inventing the concept out of thin air. He knows Blaine is an expansionist, so he's revising and reviving a controversial precedent.
And psychologically, Blaine gets what he wants: a legacy defining hemispheric project. Garfield gets what he needs: the votes and party discipline for domestic reform.
And in the twist timeline, Garfield frames it as a strategic Caribbean foothold, a Monroe Doctrine argument, and an economic expansion pitch. That's consistent with how advocates spoke in the earlier annexation debate. Now let's talk about paper money that's restarted. This right here is the hardest twist element to make plausible because Garfield is historically associated with hard money thinking. So in our alternate timeline, he doesn't become an inflationist, he becomes a coalition manager.
And what we're talking about here when we're saying hard money thinking is gold, silver. Uh, correct, Dr. Deneen?
Yes, paper money had been approved temporarily during the Civil War, but it was seen as promoting inflation and irresponsible spending. So they got rid of it when the war ended. And but this is a reward to the other main Republican faction, the so-called Conklin faction, that's worried about the poor and farmers. So what Chandler means by becoming a coalition manager is that Garfield approves a limited restart of what are called paper instruments, kind of like municipal bonds. They're structured to preserve credibility without expanding the money supply.
That's exactly right, Dr. Deneen. Now, Garfield proposes a development notes program, new paper issued for infrastructure and post war modernization, but with two guardrails: explicit redemption schedule and a legal commitment to maintain parity. So it's sold as liquidity, not permanent debasement. That allows him to placate Republicans who want more flexible money while being able to stay inside his own ideological boundary. And that is that paper must not float free forever.
Psychologically, This is classic principled compromise. Keep the core rule, bend the instrument. So now maybe it would be a good time, Chandler, for you to kind of give a detailed timeline for our twist here. So just so it's clear for everyone.
Yes, let's get into that detailed twist timeline, Dr. Weaver. In the fall of 1881, Garfield survives and returned as a living indictment of patronage violence. In 1882, the Federal Merit and Examination Act is introduced, with competitive exams, protective tenure for exam qualified posts, independent commission. The Reddick explicitly cites long-running exam traditions as proof that merit systems can outlast factions. In 1882-83, there was a pension bargain. An expansion passes with a reconciliation component that controversially includes Confederate veterans, breaking with the historical pattern where Confederate pensions were state-based, not federal. And in 1883, the civil service rules expand faster than in our timeline. There's a larger coverage, earlier, earlier standardization. All right. In 1884, Blaine backed the Dominican Republic statehood path bill, territory and protector of phase. Then the statehood timetable, politically explosive. Earlier annexation precedent in statehood language are used as justification. In 1884 and 85, limited development notes. The paper restart was authorized, convertible, and time bounded to avoid destroying confidence. In 1886 to 1888, a more professional bureaucracy begins crowding out the spoils pipeline. Party machines adapt by shifting influence to contracts, lobbying, and state/local patronage instead of federal jobs. Spec- Speculative but historically consistent behavior.
So let's look at what changes in America. If you professionalize hiring earlier, you change the stress chemistry of a government itself. Less fear based conformity, more rule based culture. Okay, assimilate that in your thinking. You change the chemistry so that you're not just afraid and you conform and you become sycophants like we see happening now, and you go back to rule based culture, which is kind of a foundation point of our republic, the rule of law, which we seem to have forgotten. But you also create a new psychological risk: bureaucratic self protection. Competence doesn't automatically equal courage.
Now, the pension reconciliation move could lower post war sectional bitterness by allowing the South to be more developed, or it could inflame it depending on implementation. Either way, it changes party incentives by making federal spending a bridge between regions 50 years earlier than in our time.
Now, foreign policy is where the biggest different America emerges. If Garfield and Blaine succeed in a Dominican Republic statehood track, then the U.S. becomes Caribbean anchored earlier and formally. That likely reshapes later debates about intervention and hemispheric power well before 1898, and it would intensify domestic arguments over race, citizenship, and empire.
The real Garfield had a short tenure and some huge symbolic impact. Our twist, Garfield, a survivor president who uses moral shock to build a rules based federal state, merit exams with deep historical precedent, a pension bargain meant to buy reconciliation, and a foreign policy trade that pulls the U.S. into the Caribbean earlier.
What's our main history twist takeaway? Individual lives matter the most when they collide with institutional fault lines. James Garfield, like Jack Kennedy after him, is a leader who accomplishes some good, great things and could have accomplished more. We'll never know exactly how, but this is one possibility that I think would have worked.
I think it would too, Dr. Deneen. And if you want to argue with us, folks, good. Please do. We welcome it. The whole point here is to test what is plausible. So please feel free to drop your comments. Which twist is the most believable for you? And which one breaks the timeline?
Well, for Dr. Deneen and Chandler Foster, I'm going to say goodbye for now.